So despite a lot of people telling me not to get into this, including my wallet, I have dived into the rabbit hole of the mechanical keyboard world, and I recently built my very first keyboard, which is right here. This is a glorious GMMK Pro body with Panda switches, it's a tactile switch, along with Durox stabilizers and a polycarbonate plate. And I used a combination of Krytox lube. Well, actually the switches were already pre-lubed, but the Durox stabilizers had to be lubed myself with a combination of Krytox 205 G0, as well as some dielectric grease. And then this is also a keycap set from Glorious as well. So this is my very first keyboard, and very happy with how it feels, how it sounds, how it looks. But I'm building a second one today. Once again, I am going to be using the GMMK Pro body, but this time it's going to be black. We're going to go with a blacked out theme, but everything else about this keyboard is going to be pretty different than the first one I built. The reason being is that there's a lot of different options that you have with building a custom mechanical keyboard, and based on the parts and the materials you choose, you can get a completely different experience from keyboard to keyboard. So I'm really just kind of curious to see how this second keyboard compares to the first one. I really want to sort of familiarize myself with how these various parts affect the typing experience. So for starters, I'm going to be using the Link switches from Glorious. These are a linear switch, unlike the tactile Pandas that are in the first keyboard I built. These are not lubed, however, so we're going to do some lubing today. I'm going to have to lube 87 switches individually. It's probably going to take a while. I'm also going to be using a brass plate that was initially supposed to go inside of this keyboard, but it didn't actually fit with the aftermarket Durox stabilizers, so that's why I ended up having to go with polycarbonate. However, I'm going to be using the stock stabilizers with this keyboard, though I will be able to use the brass plate this time around. There's a few differences, of course, between polycarbonate and brass plates. First of which being weight. This is going to be a lot lighter than brass, so our end product for today's keyboard is going to feel a bit heftier, a bit heavier than the first one. And some people like that because it just makes the keyboard feel more planted on your desk, more premium and all that stuff. Again, matter of preference though. The other difference is sound. So you get more of a thock sound with the polycarbonate. It's a bit more subdued, quiet. Whereas on brass, it's going to be a little louder, a little pingier, this is usually a popular choice of plate for linear switches, actually, because a lot of people like the way it sounds when it bottoms out on the brass. We'll see how that goes. I've got a Glorious coiled cable in black, of course. I've got some black GPBT keycaps, along with some Bitwit keycaps, which you can get on our store, bitwit.tech. They're also semi-see-through, so you can actually see the RGB lighting through them. Pretty cool. I'm also going to be using these TX films, which I did use for the first keyboard. They're essentially, well, films. These little pieces of plastic material, I think they're plastic. They basically go in between the top and bottom housing of each switch, and what that does is it kind of prevents the switch from wiggling once it's inside or mounted onto the plate. And that wiggle will actually create more noise, and it doesn't have as solid of a feel when you're typing. So it's going to improve both the acoustics and the feel of the keyboard. We also have, this is our lube, dielectric grease, and Krytox 205 G0, one of the more popular lubes in the mechanical keyboard community. And I've also got a lube station from Glorious. This is basically going to allow me to lube batches of switches at a time instead of one at a time, so I can just knock it out a bit faster. It's still going to take a while, but this should speed things up a little bit. Then we've got our tools, keycap pullers, lube brush, and that sort of thing. But those are all the parts that we're using for today's build. I think I'm going to start off this video with lubing the switches. I'm also going to apply those TX films on each of these as well. So I guess we'll just, I'll show you how I lube a single switch first, lube and film one switch, and then we'll probably just do a time lapse of the other switches after that. Otherwise, this could be a 5-hour video. And then we'll just take it from there, building out the rest of the keyboard. Should be a lot of fun. Let's get started. Before we continue, thanks to Noom for sponsoring today's video. So in the past, I've used a bunch of popular apps and digital health platforms when trying to lose weight, but I've never come across something quite like Noom. Rather than focusing solely on calorie counting or restrictive dieting, Noom leverages a combination of human coaches, psychology, and science to help people meet their most ambitious health and weight loss goals. The platform has daily audible lessons that have already given me a deeper insight on things like why I feel the urge to snack late at night, how the caloric density of food is just as important as caloric intake, or even how my psychological motivation for why I want to lose weight can make or break my fitness journey. One of the custom courses I took quickly taught me how to be more aware of my personal triggers so I can start retraining my behavior over time. To me, this kind of psychological approach seems like a way more sustainable path to weight loss than most. Besides that, there's trained health coaches and a community group chat, so I also get the sense that there's a real support system in place to lean on and help me stay motivated. This is one of the more progressive health platforms I've come across that actually makes my weight loss goals seem realistic and attainable. Just click the link in the description below and it'll take you to your free Noom evaluation, which is super quick and it helps you create a custom plan that you can start working on today. So if you're ready to take control of your health and you trust science to get you there, check out Noom. All right, we're gonna lube our first switch here. And by the way, this isn't by no means a guide or a tutorial on exactly how to lube switches or even build a mechanical keyboard. I'm kind of just showing you guys the process that I went through for my first keyboard build, and obviously the one that I'm going through now. The main difference, of course, being that this time around, I'm gonna be lubing all of my switches because they are not pre-lubed like the last keyboard was. I'm gonna go ahead and open the switch using this switch opener. You don't need a switch opener, it makes your life a lot easier. You can always use like a flathead screwdriver to open it up or similar, but let's just crack this guy open here.
I don't want to do this no more.
Okay, so that fell out. So there's the stem. You've got both halves of the housing as well as the spring, which kind of got away from me. There you go. Also, shout out to Teha Types. He's a huge creator and icon in the mechanical keyboard space. And I watched his tutorial on how he lubes his switches. So go ahead and give him a follow if you're interested. I'm gonna go ahead and start off by lubing the bottom half of the housing. So we're just gonna take a little bit of Krytox here, 205 G0. Don't need a lot. And I'm gonna start off by putting a little bit of lube on this side of the slider, I guess. Is this called a slider? I'm not sure. Again, I'm a noob, do not follow me. Could be doing everything wrong right now. I'm pretty sure most of this is correct though. And then a little bit on these golden tabs, a little bit on the inside of the sliders, and then kind of just evening it out, making sure that it's all coated evenly. You don't want to leave any like white residue. It should just look kind of sheen by the time you're done with it. Apparently it's like very easy to overlube your switches, so less is more in most cases. So that's the bottom half of the housing. And top half of the housing, I don't believe you lube any part of that, so we'll leave that alone. You do, however, lube the spring. So I'm gonna take a little bit more lube here, and you just do the ends, both around the outside and the inside. I don't want too much though. Get rid of some of the excess there. And once you're done lubing one side of the spring, you can actually put it back into the bottom half of the housing. And then from here, you can lube the other end of the spring. Afterwards, we're gonna lube our stem, and the stem, I should have gotten a stem holder. That would have been a lot easier, but instead I'm just gonna have to use my fingers, which is a little tricky in these gloves, but I don't like getting lube on my fingers.
Pathetic.
So that's why I'm wearing gloves. Actually, you know what? I think I can use tweezers to hold it. Yeah, that's nice. All right, so just a teeny bit of lube, and I'm gonna put a small dab here on one slider, a small dab on the other slider. We also want to get the areas around the sliders, so both sides. You also want to lube the inside, so like the inner walls of the stem. Oh, and can't forget about the back side of the stem as well. And for linear switches, it's also suggested that you lube the legs of the stem, which is right here. So I'm going to coat the sides and the top. You can lube the stem legs of a tactile switch as well, but if you do, you're gonna lose some tactility, which may defeat the purpose of having that tactile switch in the first place. So it's a matter of preference. You'll have to consider the trade-off between smoothness and tactility, but you definitely do it for linear switches. Okay, and then I'm just gonna kind of fill everything in, do a nice even coating on all the areas that we just lubricated. Oh, and I believe you have to do you should do the top of the pole, the stem pole as well, with whatever little lube you have left on the brush, which would be plenty. And once that's done, you're pretty much ready to reassemble the switch. So starting with the bottom housing, I'm gonna go ahead and put my stem back into place over the spring, making sure that the legs of the stem are facing the gold leaf. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, I have to apply our film switch. I almost forgot. So let me go ahead and put this down into the keycap holder. Actually, it goes this way. Not keycap holder, but the switch opener. This is our film right here. And you can see that there's kind of like more rectangular side on the right side here. These two little tabs. That's supposed to go opposite of the gold leaf. And you kind of just want to slide it over, making sure it goes over the sliders. Make it flush all the way down. And then we can bring our stem back. There we go. And finally, we can close off our switch with the top half of the housing and just click it into place, close it up. Oh, and there we have our first lube switch. That probably took me, I don't know, 2 minutes or so, thereabouts. So yeah, this is obviously a very time-consuming part of the process. If you think about it, I'm about to lube 86 more of these switches at 2 minutes apiece. That's definitely a chunk of time. So just be aware if you are gonna do this for the first time that you carve out ample time to do so. Maybe put on some music in the background, just chill out. But there's a reason why people do it, because the performance of the switch, the sound and feel, it definitely just makes a huge difference when they're lubed. You can get pre-lube switches as well. Like I said in my first build, that's how I did it there. But of course, the enthusiast crowd has their opinions, and you know, doing it yourself is always better because you can choose which lube you use. You can have a more consistent feel and sound across all switches because you know that you're actually applying the same amount of lube in the same areas for every single switch. Whereas if they're pre-lube, you're kind of just left to the hands of the manufacturer or supplier. But there you go. There's our first lube switch. So at this point, we're just going to take it off to a montage, and I'll go ahead and start lubing the rest of our switches, which should only take me about 20 years. All right, the keyboard is complete and it looks really nice. Like honestly, like pretty subdued, blacked out, which is to be expected, but we'll talk more about aesthetics in a little bit. First off, how did the build go for me? Well, pretty smoothly. Didn't really hit any complications or run into many hurdles. However, lubing the switches one at a time took a lot longer than I thought. I was expecting maybe a couple hours. I ended up spending a good 6 to 6.5 hours just on lubing the switches.
Man, I'm gonna break my
keyboard.
I swear.
Which is insane. I understand why people lube their own switches, obviously for more control, getting to use the type of lube and viscosity that you want to get the look and feel that you're going for, and all that stuff. Application method, you get to control everything, and that's understandable. But with the amount of time invested that's required, I don't know if I'll actually ever lube my own switches again unless I just have tons of free time opening up at some point, which I don't really see happening for me. So just something to be aware of. If you're gonna lube your own switches, prepare to spend it's like an all-day thing, which I guess maybe is why some people will probably split up the actual process. Maybe they'll do like a couple batches of keys or switches at a time, just so that it's not so insane in one run. Yeah, that was definitely unexpected. Apart from that though, the build was really smooth. The brass plate fit over the stabilizers perfectly, unlike with the Durox stabs. The Durox stabs on the first keyboard I built, the brass plate was just not going to take at all. This fit like a glove. So that was nice. Once I had all the switches lubed, everything was really quick and easy for the most part. And I think that's pretty much all to say about the build. It was very straightforward. Next, I guess we can talk about aesthetics. Obviously, it's very subdued, super stealthy. I kind of was expecting the keycaps to look a little bit darker. I thought they were gonna be more black. I guess it was kind of hard to tell from the website. Then again, like I also thought that this particular case from the Glorious website was gonna be white, especially because it's called Ice White on the website, but it's actually silver. Again, I couldn't tell from the photos on the website, so I don't know, Glorious, maybe you need to tweak your color correcting on those photos or something. But anyway, I still think the sort of gunmetal, asphalt, gray, whatever you want to call it, looks really nice. The actual frame or the case of the board itself is actually black, and the slight contrast between that and the gray keycaps is kind of growing on me. It is worth noting, however, that the volume knob on the right side is black. It does match the case, and that also adds a bit more contrast to the rest of the keycaps. And the Bitwit keycap, the escape key that I added there at the end, is also looking really nice. It kind of evens out, sort of matches the volume knob on the opposite end of the board. One thing I wasn't expecting was the brass plate to kind of shine through underneath the keycaps. It's ever so slight, but honestly, when the light hits it at a certain angle, you can really see it because the brass is obviously super reflective, and it gives it a really cool, kind of unique look that I've never really seen in a keyboard before, at least one that I've had, like a pre-built that I've owned over the years. It's definitely a unique look that kind of makes me want to get some custom keycaps that are like black and gold, or maybe just some gold keycaps to really complement that really subtle effect. But it looks really cool. It's probably not for everyone, especially if you have a lot of overhead lighting. You might not like the reflectivity, but I personally dig it, and I think it adds a really cool special look to an otherwise stealthy keyboard. The last thing I'll say about aesthetics is that you can kind of see the switches, like the link switches. If you look at the keyboard at a steep angle, you can kind of see that teal aqua color of the link switches peeking through. It's not very obvious, but it is there, again, if you're at the right angle, and it's not my favorite. It doesn't really complement the gray, the black, or the brass colors in the rest of the board. And I would have definitely preferred switches that were either a bit more color neutral or clear or something like that. Again, it's not a huge deal, but it is something to be aware of. I think switch color is something people don't really consider. Well, unless you're talking about like cherry MX colors, that's obviously different. But I mean, the physical color of the switches, I feel like isn't really considered much, or at least I haven't considered it much as a as a really new member of the keyboard enthusiast community. It's not really something I considered until today. Now I'll definitely be looking out for switch color, physical switch color, for future builds for that reason, because it can peer through at certain angles. Oh, something I forgot to mention about the actual build. We'll talk about that before we discuss the sound of the keyboard. I actually ran out of Krytox lube about I'd say like 85-90% the way through lubing my switches. I had about 15 or 16 switches left to go, and I completely ran out of Krytex. I wasn't expecting to, because with each switch you're just using such a little amount, but it really adds up when you've got 80 something keys or switches to lube. So I ended up lubing the last 15 or so switches with the glorious G Lube, which I had also bought along with the rest of the parts. This lube is definitely a bit thicker than the Krytox, at least the Krytox 205 G0. So because of that, I definitely use the G Lube a lot more sparingly. I used a very small amount compared to the Krytox, and for those particular switches, I reserve them for the F keys and some of the keys on the side as well, which are the keys that I press the least by a long shot. That being said, there's really very little difference between the feel and sound of the switches with the Krytox lube versus the G Lube. And maybe that's because I made sure to compensate by using very little G Lube. Had I used more G Lube, or the same amount of G Lube as I did Krytox on these same switches, I think maybe the differences would be a lot more noticeable. But honestly, I wouldn't be able to tell. Maybe it's because I'm still a noob to this whole thing, and someone who's more experienced could immediately notice the difference, but it really just hardly makes a difference to me. Now, when it comes to the sound, this is definitely one of the characteristics of a keyboard that a lot of enthusiasts look at the closest, apart from feel. I really love the sound that these keys make. The way that the keycaps and the switches sound on the brass plating. It's actually not quite as high-pitched as I expected it to be. It's actually super quiet and relatively low-pitched, but they're just really, really quiet, very muted keys. I'm not using O-rings or anything like that, and I definitely wouldn't even need to with this board. Apparently, you're not supposed to really use O-rings as much as you used to. They're not quite as relevant, as switch manufacturers have gotten much better at making the switches quiet or quieter out of the box and just higher quality. So, and then O-rings also make your keys a bit mushier as well to type on. So anyway, the sound is extremely nice. It's super quiet, much quieter actually, I would say, than the first keyboard I built, which I was not expecting because it's using a polycarbonate plate, whereas the brass, I was expecting it to be more pingy and high-pitched. It's actually lower pitched. It has a lower pitched sound than the Panda switches on the polycarbonate plate, which maybe is to be expected. Again, I'm a noob, so I wouldn't know, but it is extremely quiet. The one exception is the spacebar. The spacebar is notably louder. It's the loudest key on the entire board, and it sounds much different than the other keys, which is not uncommon. I mean, that's kind of the case on with my first keyboard as well. But I don't know, this spacebar is actually really quiet on the first keyboard. It has that nice thock sound. It's very deep, whereas this spacebar is a bit more, how would you say it? Just pingy, a bit more pingy, and doesn't really sound quite as pleasant. Of course, the best way to demonstrate this to you guys is with a sound test. So summing up my overall thoughts on the second keyboard I've ever built, I like this keyboard. I love the way it looks. I love the way it sounds, with the exception of the spacebar. I think I'm gonna have to swap out the stabilizers for, well, not for Durox stabs, even though those are really popular and super high quality, as I've seen for my first build. It's just not gonna fit with this brass plate. So I'm gonna have to look up, I'm gonna do some research to see if there's some higher quality stabs than the one that come included with the GMMK Pro that also fit the brass plate from Glorious as well. I think once I take care of that, the spacebar will probably quiet up and maybe feel a little less mushy, as well as the other stabilizer keys. But I think even with that said, I'm just really not a fan of these switches, which makes me a little salty that I spent nearly 7 hours lubing each individual one. I started this build at 10:30 p.m. yesterday, and it is now 8 in the morning. So yeah, and I'm not even a huge fan of how they feel. I just love how they sound. So honestly, just based on that alone, based on just the way that these keys feel and how this thing types, the lack of tactility in the switches, the lack of resistance, I would choose keyboard number 1, the first build that I did, over the second one today, any day of the week. Just for that reason alone. Obviously, that's a big reason. How the keys feel is probably the biggest reason why you would love or hate a keyboard. Not to say I hate this keyboard, but it's definitely not my favorite typing experience in that regard. That being said, I do wish my first keyboard was as quiet as this one. Again, with the exception of the spacebar. But overall, it was a great experience. I'm glad that I finally got to lube my switches for the first time, even though I'll probably never do it again. It's kind of like sleeving your own PC cables. It's fun and good to do it once, but you probably don't ever want to do it again after doing so. It gives you a lot of appreciation and respect for the process once you understand it and you've done it yourself, but it's so time consuming, and I would say lubing your switches, however, is definitely more worthwhile of an investment if you are going to do it than sleeving your own cables, because there's a lot of performance attached to it, right? How the keys, it affects how the keys sound and how they feel, whereas sleeving your cables, I mean, that's not gonna affect the performance of your system whatsoever. It's just an aesthetic thing. But you know, I think that's all I have to say about this build for now. So you guys let me know what you think. What do you think compared to my first build? Which one do you like better in terms of both sound and aesthetics? Obviously, you can't really compare feel, and I've already, I think, made that decision for most of you. But let me know what you think, and also what kind of build you'd like me to do next. I'm definitely not gonna stop here. I will stop lubing my own switches for sure, but I wanna build another one really bad, really soon. So if you guys have any suggestions on the type of build, an aesthetic, or a theme that you want me to go for, feel free to let me know down below. As always, guys, toss a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Get subscribed for more tech content coming at you really soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.